Hey class, welcome to Building Codes and Principles. This lecture is going to be on our first two chapters in the textbook, chapters 1 and 2. A good way to start this course, and the way that our book starts our reading, is by going over how our building codes came about. Unfortunately, many of our building codes have come from tragedy, and such that if we research where the first building codes originated from, besides the funny pictures that are in our textbook that they had discovered on a stone slab from the early 1900s, that if somebody built a house or a shelter for an owner and that building collapsed, then the person who built it would be killed on site. So what we try to do with the building code is create these safety barriers so the occupants in them do not get hurt. Unfortunately, things have changed along the way, and again, it's due to the unfortunate event of people getting hurt. So the great fires that swept through America in the 1800s, all across America, was really the start of this creation of building code standards. And Chicago being the biggest one that our book points out, and if you've done any research or do any research on this, you could see that it really, really devastated a large business portion of the city. I believe it was said to be 4 miles long, and it burned for over 24 hours. Unfortunately, it burned for over 24 hours. Yes, there were fire departments at this point, but the building that the fire equipment was held in had all of the buildings back in these early times were built with pine wood. There was no fireproofing material on the exterior or interior. None of that was. They were just building out of pine, right out of the trees that they were cutting down and just putting up these buildings. Even the roof shingles were made out of wood. But the building that housed the fire equipment had just recently, or right before the fire, it had a new roof put on, a new slate roof when they started using slate roofs. But the structure itself was made out of pine. So as soon as this fire got anywhere, close to it, and the embers fell upon the building, it was burnt to the ground. So they had no access to try to control this fire at that point in time, and they just let it burn. It ended up going out, I believe, like I said, 24 hours later because it rained. So that's what saved the remainder of the city. Some other facts about this fire, like I said, it was about 4 miles by 1 mile, and it destroyed over 17,000 buildings, 73 miles of street in Chicago, and all of the people who lived there and owned businesses there were left homeless. The fire absolutely destroyed everything. Luckily, only 300 people died. It could have been a lot worse, obviously. Sad to lose life, and again, hence why these building codes were created, because of the loss of life. But the other thing with this fire, which is pretty interesting to do some research on, is there were many insurance companies. So family-owned insurance companies that were in this business district that caught on fire. And so with insurance companies being burnt to the ground, literally, they had no way of being able to fund the claims that were coming in for the people who did have insurances on their property. These insurance companies just went bankrupt, right? And they had no money to pay back for the claims because everything was gone. Everything was gone. So there was this huge shift in insurance companies, and really the insurance is the one who drove the change for the building codes. So the National Board of Fire Underwriters, this was a group established in 1886 with the aim of preventing loss from fire and to protect properties and lives from fire-related harms. So it gathered statistics from fires across the United States, and it created this template for fire insurance. The group was historically significant for having created these standards for fire coverage. And also they contributed to the use, so classifying buildings as residential or commercial. This is, we're going to be talking about occupancy and use in the next 2 weeks of our course, especially next week after within chapters 3 and 4. Sorry, getting my words all jumbled up here. Anyways, so there are the ones who actually started these different standards of fire safety and then classifying use. So it was all built towards our building code, that which is of today. Out of this terrible loss, the industry trade organizations created a new institution of fire safety in Chicago, including a fire patrol and fire inspectors. So these were some of our first inspectors as well too. This insurance industry did spearhead fire safety, as I was just mentioning, improvements at the union level as to secure their buildings that they were insuring, whether it be commercial or residential. So from the 1800s, after the tragedies across the United States with the fire and the insurance companies getting involved for fire safety to be able to secure the buildings, we started, the population started to grow, right, in the early 1900s. And it started to grow and increase so that people moved closer to bodies of water up in the mountains and different areas that they necessarily didn't build on before the early 1900s. Fire safety is still being a huge component of our building codes even today. Before I even did this video, I had 2 phone calls. Both were related to safety codes. One was a fire code. We're framing up a basement. So we're framing wood walls along the concrete walls in the basement. And you have to leave a little air gap between that framed wall and the concrete wall. For moisture to pass through and things of that nature. But we also have to worry about the fire code, because if a fire got into that structure down in the basement, that airspace actually becomes a chase way for the fire to rapidly go around the entire perimeter of that foundation. So somebody was calling me to ask about the code. Funny that I'm talking about this now, and safety and fire and all of these things, but they had to actually fire caulk the holes that the electrician drilled horizontally through this wood framed studded wall. And he was kind of confused by it, because usually we have to do it between floor layers automatically. It's default in our head. Fire-proof fire caulking any hole penetrations that go from the basement to the first floor to second floor to attic. And so on, but horizontally that's a little bit different. And but I said, no, yeah, it's fire safety, right? It's fire code. We have to be able to put barriers and prevent that fire from spreading, to be able to allow the occupants of the building or the house to be able to get out safely. So, and then another phone call that I got for safety was sprinklers, and we're going to be talking about occupancy and use next week in our code, and wondering about if we have a mixed use building. Maybe this will be a assignment question, FYI. If you have a mixed use building, meaning offices on the first floor and residential on the second floor, 2 apartments on the second floor, so just 2, is that building required automatically to have a sprinkler system? We're required to have all sorts of other codes for safety. Getting out of the building, which is means of egress, and window, sill heights, all sorts of different codes for safety to be able to get the occupants out. But there's a code that changes the sprinkler system law that we have to follow. And if it's above 2 living spaces in that mixed use, if it goes to 3 apartments, then the whole building automatically needs to be sprinklered. So funny how when you do things, things come up in your life, and then I have fun things to talk about to you guys. But anyways, the growth of the code has happened because the growth of the population and us expanding out into all sorts of different areas across the United States. And as you can see, starting in 1915, the first building officials and code administration came to about. We have an international conference of building officials, so we started getting all those building officials together, and everybody's minds working on how to be able to create this code and safety. And by 1922, they had this international conference of building officials. This uniform building code was actually published. So one of the first uniform building codes to try to get the United States as a whole to be able to start to follow happened. There was a Southern Building Code Congress, and there was a national building code. So you see in 1946 and 1950, we had a Southern and a national. Yes, there's different regions in the South and in the North. And so, at that time, they thought that they should be separate. Finally, the national and Southern codes merged in the 1990s, not, terribly, terribly long ago. And then that ICC that we talk about now is the real revolution that happened in the development of codes. We had the American Disability Act. We had the Federal Fair Housing Act in 1990 and 1988. And then we had our International Building Code published in 2000. So again, not too long ago, 23 years ago, right? We had finally had that IBC that we talk about, International Building Code. I don't have on here International Residential Code, because now here it is 2023, and we have 7 different code books to work with. Every state started splitting up and doing their own codes, right? So we have amendments. So you have your state building codes level at this point. And there was a major revision of that IBC in 2015. And now we're having another major revision to the IBC in 2024, I believe it's coming out. That's what they said, July 2024. So again, you have your state, you have your local. We have to be able to be aware of the American Disability Act and the Federal Fair Housing Acts as well too. So there is other codes, right? We have fire safety codes, we have plumbing codes, we have electrical codes. HVAC is in our building code, so that's not a separate code. The building inspectors will inspect HVAC systems, but as us studying the building code and practices, we do have to be aware of these other codes that are around, right? We have to be knowledgeable of them, but we don't need to know them as much as we do the actual building code when we're in architectural field and the build field, right? Project management, build field. Again, we have to be aware of them. And once you work in the field and once you're working with the code, these things do become very familiar to you. So there's different ways of navigating the code. Our chapter 2 does a really good explanation of some different symbols, italics, bold, different ways that the code book helps us review it. This is not about memorizing code. This is about being able to find the answers, find the code. So the code book does help us navigate with these keywords. Intent, you're going to hear intent a lot in our chapter 2 of our textbook here. Designers have intent, right? So as architectural designers, architects, we have visual and these experiences that we have to try to create for our clients. And we also have the code to contend with. So we have to try to look at, what problem or performance criteria the code section is going to address with whatever it is that we're building, whether it's new construction, additions, remodels. As architectural designers, we have to be able to, again, always know how to find answers in the code and what is the intent of the code, and try to, creatively get our design to meet that. Sections of the code to solve certain problems. The intent of the code is a critical idea to understand. And again, the intent of it. What is it intending to do for the performance of that design? Ask why rather than what when you are puzzled by the actual language of the code. Why are they asking me to do this? Think a little bit deeper into it instead of just thinking that the code is annoying, like we all do who work in the code. The use of the code. So we first need to classify the building according to occupancy, type of construction, location of property, floor area, height, and number of stories, and means of egress. All of these things, again, are very well detailed in your chapter 2. Please take a look at them, note some things in your book, tab some things up, and we'll dive into the occupancy classification and use next video. Thank you so much.